For a long time, you guys have been requesting that I do more guides on more hardware, and today we're going to be looking at the RTX 4070, and we're going to be undervolting it or overclocking it. Now, I did say or because both options here are very valid in my opinion. The RTX 4070 is that mid-range graphics card in the 4000 series stack, and with that mid-range silicon, you get the option of doing really both, as opposed to the RTX 4080 and 4090. I would not overclock those, I'd actually undervolt them because they use up a lot of power, especially compared to the 4070. However, that said, we've got here the Zotac Holo Edition here, which is the Spiderman version where they include some toys and some stickers, and we'll talk a bit about this model more later in the video. However, what you're going to need here on your desktop is 3 programs. They are an absolute must. 2 of those come included in one, which is MSI's Afterburner, where I can put the links in the description below for you guys for these programs. And you download Afterburner, install it, and then also download FurMark and install that. And the reason we're going to be using FurMark as opposed to Heaven is it's much more consistent to show you guys the FPS once we've done the undervolts and the overclocks, and you can see the differences versus the default stock profile. Never pay full price for Windows 10 or 11 again. With today's video sponsor, SCD Keys, you can get activated for as little as $15 using that coupon BFTYC. Links in the description below. So after we've installed these programs, we can then open up MSI Afterburner as well as RiverTuner Statistics. And again, make sure you install RiverTuner with Afterburner. It's included in the package, and it's very important for seeing the live statistics, which we'll go over in a second here. So once we've installed this program, we can see here we've got our drivers, got the RTX 4070, and we can left click on this cogwheel right here, and that'll bring up some settings. And then we want to go to Start with Windows and Start Minimize. Make sure these are unchecked for now. We're going to re-enable these after we confirm our undervolts and overclocks. And then we go over, left click on the monitoring tab right here, and make sure these 7 settings, GPU temperature, GPU usage, core clock, memory clock, VRAM usage, power, and frame rate are all checked. And they're also got the setting of right here, left click, show in on-screen display. Now for frame rate on show in on-screen display, I make sure that's also text and graph, so it's easy to see my FPS, and also if we're getting any stutters while we're overclocking or undervolting. Then for power, I've also made an override group name there, and I've called that RTX 4070 power consumption. Then for VRAM, I've called that RTX 4070 VRAM usage. And then for these top 4 settings here, I've made a custom group name for RTX 4070. This just makes it so that they're all clumped in, easy to see. And then if we go over to RiverTuner Statistics right over here, we can also make sure this is Start with Windows and Show with on-screen display. Now we've also got these settings right here. You can adjust the size of the visibility of the markers, but then we go over to on-screen display. I've toggled that, I've set that to F12, benchmarking keys are F4 and F5, and then I've also gone over to the user interface right here and make sure all these tooltips are unselected because I find them very annoying. So after that, we can click OK, and then we can open up FurMark because we are going to get a base right here for how our GPU performs out of the box. Now for these settings, I'm going to go 1080p, 4x MSAA, and then I'm just going to go GPU stress, and we can just ignore this warning right here, just left click and go. And so what this is going to do is it's going to start stressing our GPU at 100%, well, close to it. We can see here it's running at 97%, and the good thing about this GPU at 4x MSAA is it's also stressing the VRAM, which is pretty important because that is the first thing we are going to start with our clocks right here. We're going to go to MSI Afterburner, hold left click on this little dot right here on the memory clocks, and we're going to boost this all the way up. We're going to get a little bit greedy here. We're going to go for 1000 megahertz. Now, I find with a lot of RTX 4070s, I've actually tested quite a few of them and I've spoke to a few friends, all our RTX 4070s can do 1000 megahertz on the memory. So that's a huge boost to your performance. But in this case, my GPU manages to go up all the way up to around 1400 megahertz. And what I'll do is I'll show you what happens when we reach instability, because if this happens, you've got to dial it back. So see what we did there? We just left clicked in over 1500 megahertz on the memory, and our FurMark started getting some artifacts and crashed out. And the good thing is I can keep recording this for you because I've got this on a capture card on a separate computer. And so we can see here the drivers have reset. The 1500 megahertz is too high. And so what we've done, we're going to dial this back now to 1200. and we've essentially found our sweet spot. We'll actually have to close down Furmark and reopen it again. And we'll see here the 1200 megahertz should be running absolutely fine at this point in time. And actually the whole program had to restart here because it just crashed out the whole program. So that'll happen if you come into unstable clocks. So let's do this again now with 1200 megahertz memory locked in. We can see there that's working absolutely fine. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to save this into 2 and save this into 3, because these are going to be our overclocking profiles. Or one's going to be overclocking, 2, 3 is going to be undervolting. And so we left click that save icon and we can save it actually into both of those. And what one is going to be is our default profile. And what we're going to do here is we're going to actually reset and then save this as 1. So 1 is our default profile. And then if we go to 2, we can left click 3, and there are easy profiles. We'll hotkey them later as well, but that's our memory clock done for today. So after we've locked in our memory overclocks, we can then left click on our profile 2 and click the check mark, and then hold down Control on our keyboard and then press F. And this is going to bring up the frequency and voltage curve editor, and this is where all the magic happens, where I'll be guiding you guys through the RTX 4070 profile, things to look out for. Now, what I've found personally with the RTX 4070, and it does actually differ to the 4060 and the 4080 and 4090, is that this sweet spot for this GPU is actually 910 millivolts. And so what this means is this point right here. There's going to be a point here, which is 910. And that's the point we're going to focus on. But let's do what we need to do first, and that is hold shift down on our keyboard, left click on this final point right here, and we're going to drag this all the way down. I like to drag it just down to 2,300. It doesn't really matter. But then we go over to this point right here on the left-hand side. We hold down Control on our keyboard, hold down left click on this final point with our mouse, and then we bring this all the way back up to roughly where it was at the start of this previous line. You can see it edged in here. It's a guide for us to know where we were previously, but I also like to bring it up slightly over just because I want the levels before our 910 undervolt to also be quite high. And I think we're going to stop right here and quickly talk about this, because I think this is where a lot of previous undervolting tutorials that even I've done when I started out undervolting, having these levels lower on the earlier phases of the undervolt also can cause instability. So it's important to make sure these earlier levels are at relatively stable levels. Now, once we've done that, we can then go to our 910 point and drive this all the way up to 2,700. And once we've done that, we can hold left click on that. So hold left click, we drag all the, no controls, no shifts. We just drag that all the way up to 2,700. And then we left click this check right here. And so what that's going to do is automatically, you can see the power consumption is dropping down from 200 watts down to 150 watts. And that's a huge saving on power. Also, we've got our memory as well. That's locked in. And so that's the basis for an RTX 4070 undervolt. Now, the reason I selected 910 is because I find it's just a safe level on pretty much all the RTX 4070s I've tried here at 2,700 megahertz. For instance, I can get this particular model to around, I think it is 875 millivolts. I think I can get it to that, and it starts to lower the power consumption. And you see the power consumption lowers a little bit more. Not by a whole lot, but for some reason it didn't lock that in then. So we can try that. And you can see here it lowers the power consumption a bit more, but we start coming into a form of instability here. And so we're a little bit lower, we're saving a little bit more power, but the 910, I find that's going to help anyone really with their undervolt, and you should be able to lock this level in at 2,700. So let's reset that quickly just to show you if you're a bit nervous on doing this. We've got our 1210 megahertz memory. We're going to drop this all the way down again. Quickly do this. Drop our 910. Run it up to 2,700. And we're good to go. There's our undervolt there. How you doing? We got low power consumption. And we've also got one big benefit here too. We'll go back to this benchmark while it's running. and that is lower temperatures, where we were running at around 64 degrees before. Now we're all the way down to 57 degrees. And I can't stress this enough. You're not only going to be saving power, but the longevity of your parts is going to be extended. And this is why I love undervolting my gear, especially my GPU and my main rig as well. I make sure that's undervolted, and the GPU being the most important part of a PC is everything, right? So it's actually the most expensive part too, a lot of the times. So here we've got this GPU running absolutely sweet on these settings. What we'll do right now is we're going to save this for the RTX 4070 on Profile 2, and then we're going to go over now to Profile 3, which is going to be our overclocks. So this is going to be a little bit different now, where we're going to hold control down on our keyboard and then get this last point right here, left click this, and drag it all the way up. I found to around 3,100 personally. Like mine can go a little bit higher to 3,150, but I found dragging this up to around 3,100 should be doable on practically every body's RTX 4070. So what I'm recommending you guys here is something that's doable on pretty much all RTX 4070s that I've come into. And of course we can go higher. We can go up to try and go up to 3,200 on this particular benchmark and lock that in. And I mean, it just happens to work. But when we go into games, it actually ends up crashing. So I'm going to go here for, actually I'll go for 3,150 because I know that's where this GPU works fine. So we're going to do that. We're going to lock that in. And so the overclock is actually a lot easier than the undervolt because our power consumption is still capped at 200 watts. It's still using the same power consumption as it was before when we did the default settings, but we're getting more performance now. So we're going to save that in Profile 3. And so what we do now is also after we've got those three profiles, we've got default, undervolt, and also overclock, we can then left click on our cog wheel and we can go over now to our profiles. Left click this, and what we want to go here, Profile 1, Control F1, Profile 2, Control F2, and Profile 3, hold down Control, press F3, and we click Apply. So now we're in our benchmark. We can change between those profiles by holding Control, pressing F1, F2, and F3. And we can actually see the FPS will change on the fly. But enough of that. Let's get you guys some gaming benchmarks showing you these three different profiles, their FPS and their power consumption in a side-by-side-by-side comparison. And since this is a Spider-Man graphics card, we're going to start off our first game with none other than Spider-Man. 4K, high settings with DLSS turned on with quality. You see here we've got 170 watts on the default profile on the left versus in the middle for FPS that's fluctuating around 86 to 87 FPS. But then if we start to undervolt the GPU, we can see that our FPS goes down to around 81 to 82. And notice the power consumption, however, drop all the way from 170-ish watts down to 115. So the power consumption drop here is so big. It's actually huge. And our FPS has only dropped maybe 5%. So that's the power of undervolting. A little bit of performance, but a huge amount of power savings. Then if we go to our overclock settings now, we're getting more FPS for similar power consumption as the default profile. Roughly 90 to 91 average FPS, getting about 5% more performance for pretty much the same amount of power consumption. So for Spider-Man, the benefits are clear. You would either want to be overclocking or undervolting your card. Me personally, I do prefer that undervolt setting as we're just seeing that power consumption drop down significantly. Next up here is Baldur's Gate 3, newly released title, 85 FPS at 4K high settings with DLSS quality settings enabled. And what we've got roughly here is 190 watts for this FPS, and the temperatures there are roughly over 60 degrees. But then if we change to our undervolting profile, here's where things get really juicy, where we're getting 83 FPS. So we've only lost roughly 2 or 3 average FPS maximum, a couple of percentage points there. But our power consumption's gone all the way from 190 watts down to 140 watts. So huge savings in power there. The temperatures have automatically dropped now into the mid 50s, and this is in the middle of summer. If you guys didn't know, it's actually really hot here in Japan at the moment. And moving over now to the overclock profile, we're getting our FPS going from 85 to roughly 89, and it's using roughly the same power consumption as it was on the default profile. So just like Spider-Man, it's an absolute win for either overclocking or undervolting. And just like Spider-Man, I actually prefer the undervolting profile, where I think you're extracting the most out of your GPU on this particular setting. And now for the final title we got up here is Apex Legends 4K max settings on this 4070. Let's see what it can do. We're just using the firing range just to keep things completely apples to apples here, as to not take away from showing a different scene where the FPS could vary greatly. So you can see here roughly 110 to 115 average FPS on the default profile, using close to 190 watts on the GPU directly. And then if we change things over to our undervolt setting, what we can see here is we're dropping down to 140 watts, and we're getting virtually the same FPS here, ranging in that 110 to 115 range. So really impressed with what you can get out of undervolting, at least across all three titles that we've tested here today, but in particular in Apex Legends, it's really shining with the undervolt. Then now if we move over to the overclocks, we're getting into the 120 FPS range some of the times, and it's boosting over that range, and it's still staying the power consumption at 190 watts. So overclocking is just giving you free performance over the default profile, but then the undervolting is giving us a lot less power consumption and still the same FPS. So just like the previous two titles, we can see a trend here, and that is that undervolting, in my personal opinion, is winning out here. But of course, if you want the max FPS for the parts that you have, then overclocking is also going to be a great option on the RTX 4070. So after testing those three games, we can see the benefits of undervolting or overclocking depending on which way you want to go. They're both very valid choices for the RTX 4070. However, one thing I will add, if you've just got your PC set up or you've just got your RTX 4070, I would recommend playing games for a few days, making sure your system doesn't crash. You want to get a baseline for stability before you do any sort of tuning on your PC. That's the most important thing when it comes to tuning. Make sure you've got stability, because if we know we got stability before we start tuning, and then say for instance a game starts crashing, then we know that it's our tuning that's causing the problems. And so I do recommend before you do this to your graphics card, make sure your system's stable first. Then you can know, okay, my tune was maybe a bit too aggressive. I've got to give it a bit more voltage, or I've got to drop the clock speeds a little bit, either on the core speed or the memory. And that will help a lot in terms of getting the most out of your hardware. Now, speaking of hardware, Zotac did send this over. This will be the last portion of today's video. This was the Spider-Man edition for their Amp Aero RTX 4070. Now, they've actually got two different versions of this. They've got a 2-fan version, which is coming around $10 over MSRP. And with that, you get the plush toys included, you get the stickers, and then you also get a custom backplate, which magnetically clips onto the backplate of this 4070 here. And then there's also the 3-fan edition, which will run you up a bit more money. It's actually quite a bit more expensive than the MSRP. The last I checked was around $100 over MSRP. However, this is the 3-fan edition, the Amp Aero, and as we saw with those temperatures, this does a phenomenal job of keeping the GPU cool even when it's overclocked in the middle of summer, getting into 60-degree region, maximum temperatures there, and still remaining. The whole time I was actually recording this video with the microphone, a condenser microphone, only about maybe 40 centimeters away from the GPU. And I cannot hear this GPU. I can hear the aircon in the background. I can hear the bugs outside in summer. And I just can't hear this GPU. So it remains whisper quiet, remains really cool. And if you undervolt it, as we saw in some of those games, we're getting into the 50-degree region. So Zotac have built this card out really well. It is a big card, however, the 3-fan edition, so make sure you've got the room to fit it in your case. Though in terms of the Spider-Man gear included, you've really got to be into the Spider-Man gear, or perhaps be a PC lover, and you like, say, the RTX 4070, and then you've got a kid that likes Spider-Man. You want to get a 4070, go get the 4070, and then just give the kid all the Spider-Man merch and make him happy too. So there's sort of options there. Me personally, although I like the Spider-Man movies and the comics, I personally don't really have a need to have toys and stickers and stuff like that. So I just go for a regular Zotac RTX 4070 and save a bit of money. That'd be my opinion personally. Anyhow, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to hit that like button for us. Look forward to reading your comments, just like this question of the day here, which comes from TechSpin, and they're talking about our monitor review on the Philips monitor, and they said, loved it. Who knew Philips was competitive in the gaming monitor market? Great info. Keep up the good content. So the Philips monitor is actually mind-blowing in how low the input lag was. That was the biggest thing that impressed me with that monitor. And it might, for me personally, I'm just surprised that Philips are coming into the gaming market and the monitors, and they're just beating out practically every other brand in terms of input lag, which is really good to see. But also on top of that, the monitor was almost flawless. There was a few nuances there, but the monitor was practically flawless. And I mean, it should be at its price point, but thanks for the comment. And also, yes, Philips, they are getting very competitive in the gaming monitor space. That's their Evnia brand. I'm personally going to keeping an eye on this brand and seeing what other monitors they release, because it's actually ironic because the 4K IPS monitors I bought here at the studio over a year ago were Philips 4K monitors, not the Evnia brand, just regular, but they were like $200 USD for 4K IPS, and the color balance out of the box was phenomenal too. So they're really coming in, hitting the monitor scene pretty hard, and hopefully they can keep it up. Anyhow, guys, I'll catch you in the next one. If you stayed this far and you're enjoying that content, be sure to hit that sub button, ring that bell, and I'll see you next time. Peace out for now. Bye.